Welcome to the video. I haven't done a talking one in a while, and this is a really interesting subject, or at least I think so. So every single country has a bunch of unique challenges that they're overcoming, and whether that's economic, whether that's to do with their population, whether that's to do with crime, whether it's natural disasters, everybody's facing a different thing, and then in that hand, you have everybody being influenced by different world forces in a different way, by different world leaders. And I think due to the unique challenges that Japan faces, Elon Musk has an incredible impact, or incredible potential impact on Japan. And I would say for the most part, very, very positive. If you don't know who Elon Musk is, it's the CEO of SpaceX. He does Tesla. He has the Boring Company. He founded the company Neural Lace for like mind-computer interfaces. Fascinating character, doing a lot of really, really interesting stuff. But before we get into exactly his impact on Japan, we need to set up the challenges that they're facing here. And I'd like to throw a few statistics at this to give it a little more weight behind it. So basically, as of a census taken in 2014, 33% of the population in Japan was over 60 years old. That's wild. At the same time, I believe it was 24.7 were over 65, and then over 70, it was like 12.5. You add all these numbers up, roughly, you can look them up, but roughly it basically adds up to 71% of the population being over 60 years old. So that's wild. And you see it if you go out, not so much in the countryside, although it is apparent, but if you're in the city at certain times of the day, particularly in Tokyo, you can just see how many old people. It's old people everywhere. So having all these old people creates a number of different issues. I would say, first and foremost, is a question of quality of life for these elderly people, where there's not, traditionally in Japan, you used to have the, or not used to, but you have a structure and it has a specific name, this type of family living where you have young members of a family eventually living with the old members of the Japanese family to look after them. But when you have such a disparity in ages, there's not this traditional structure. Its possibility isn't present anymore because you just don't simply have enough of the young people to look after the old people. Not only do you have so many old people living in Japan, but they're one of the most rapidly aging, or one of the most, not rapidly aging, but one of the fastest growing older populations. It's because they live so long. I believe they're the third longest lived culture in the entire world. So they're winning, but as Bane might say, victory has defeated you. Like you can see, you know, they're just, there's too many of them getting too old. They're doing too well, and it's creating issues. So you have, like I say, this problem in the household where you can't have people looking after the elderly in the same way that you used to, which is impacting quality of life. But then there's a couple other things that are issues as well. You have a disappearing workforce, so you don't have the young generation able to replace the old generation, and that's meant that retirement ages have had to increase. Not only that, this has political ramifications as well, because for the way that the Japanese political system works, a region is given a certain amount of weight in their political houses. So it's not the population density that dictates the sort of impact that they're going to have. It's just the region size. But that means we're out in the countryside where you have a tiny population. It's something like 93% of the Japanese population lives in cities. You have these large areas that have huge political impact out in the countryside, but with low voting populations. And they're having the same impact as a super high, dense area that should, you would think, arguably have more significant impact with so many more people. So the higher population density areas are not being represented. And in the countryside, there's a lot of old people, and a lot of old people, not surprisingly, vote conservative, because as we get older, we enjoy the good old days and we don't like things to change. So the Conservative Party has been relying on this system of old people out in the countryside with low populations having a huge impact on the political system. So you've got the political system being impacted, you've got the quality of life of people being impacted, you've got the whole economic system is under heavy-duty pressure because of this. You have a pension system that's getting bent and bent and bent because you don't have again, the workforce of young people paying into the pension plan to be able to support this top-heavy disparity, creating a lot of different issues. So finally, because we laid that groundwork, we can kind of talk about why I think Elon Musk, and whether it's directly or influentially, I think that's a word, it can have a lot of potential impact here in Japan. So I would talk about the one that's kind of like nearest and dearest to my heart, because it approaches the kind of humanity of things as opposed to like any sort of political stance or anything like that. It has to do with the quality of life that you would have here in Japan. So one big thing is that you have a lot of Japanese drivers, as much as there's an incredible transit system here, but elderly Japanese drivers, which, I mean, it shows up in a number of news articles as dangerous. And it's not that these older generation people want to endanger anybody, it's just that they don't want to give up their ability to go out of their house and be social, because that's going to destroy their quality of life. And so somebody like Elon Musk could have a huge impact on quality of life here in Japan because he's led this charge of automotive automation. So they've actually, I can't remember the exact region, but it was one of the first that was doing like full testing of fully automated vehicles, because now you have, if all these automated vehicles, self-driving cars could work, you have all these elderly people who would have that mobility, that agency returned to them, and they'd be able to go back out into their communities again safely. Because, I mean, eventually there is a sort of cutoff. Like, you're sort of driving, you're driving dangerously, they take your license away because they have to. This would then return that agency to these older people, which is a really, really good thing, I think, because we are social creatures, and to be able to go out that door and to see your family, and to do so without it being a burden or some huge extra cost or responsibility of having somebody drive you around, would be a really, really incredible thing. So that's really, really good. It could have this huge impact on the quality of life of this massively growing, aging population in Japan. So bam, there it is. There's the first one. The next one that I think like directly feeds into kind of the survival of Japan was what I was talking about, their workforce. So automation, which self-driving cars essentially are, I believe that 14% of an economy is usually made up of transportation. And so to say that self-driving cars are separate from automation is silly. It's not. There's a whole bunch of automation that won't be transportation, but that's a huge significant number. So it has a twofold impact on the economy, and I think, again, in sort of a very positive way in both ways that it impacts it. So people would say that, oh, automation is going to take away jobs, but in Japan that's a really good thing because they need to not have to occupy so many jobs. If you have those jobs that are now vacant being taken up by automation, you've taken care of that economic problem. Not only that, but you get an economic stimulus in different ways. For example, something that I was reading about, I won't go into great detail, but you get these new, I don't know if you would call them markets, but basically new economic opportunities where the new starts to come in to replace the old, where Tesla doubtlessly will influence a lot of the old traditional manufacturers, car manufacturers in Japan, like Nissan and Toyota, and they're not stupid, they see the change coming. And so they're adapting because of the huge influence that he's going to have. And one of the big things, simple things that you can use as an example of this is the battery companies. They're surging in Japan, no pun intended. They're doing really, really well. And they've had growth in their stocks, and it's created all these new opportunities. So new jobs in the sort of like developing automation and accounting for the fact that we need to have less jobs at the same time. It can have this twofold positive impact, and that's as a result of sort of inadvertent or as influence, not as directly into the car companies, but then the Japanese car companies seeing that they need to change, and so you get these new developments happening in something like a battery company, or the change in something like Nissan moving from the old way that they manufacture cars to the new way, but then new jobs are created as a result of that. So very, very interesting. Very, very helpful, very, very impactful, again, in my opinion, in a positive way. Now, I've been talking about automation as it directly relates to the things that Elon Musk has got his paws in most specifically, which is cars. But then we're going to see, I think, as economic forces change and are manipulated by the fact that automation is not going to disappear. There was some interesting study done. Where was it from? I think it's called the Novuba Research Institute, that was saying by 2035 about 50% of jobs could be automated. So we're seeing it first and foremost in cars, because that's where Tesla's got its dirty little fingers in, but it's going to affect absolutely everything. And there's no stopping it, because it is more economically efficient for these companies to do this. But in Japan's case, where you need there to be less jobs because they don't have enough people to replace them, it could be a really, really good thing, let alone what I've discussed so far in terms of the kind of quality of life impact that it could have for this older generation that just simply can't work and needs things to be a little bit more automated for them. So finally, what is the impact of then, if we're not just going to talk about cars and automation from that perspective, let's talk about automation just as automation, because like I'm saying, it's got this, by 2035, speculatively, 50% of jobs are going to be automated at that point. And what does Elon Musk say about this? And I think it's one of the most interesting and one of the most resistant things you're going to see in the Japanese culture. No matter how much the Japanese may benefit from the improvements in quality of life, this one is going to be a really, really interesting issue. So it's UBI, so the idea of universal basic income. And if you know anything about the Japanese work culture, you know now currently that there's no way that this is going to be discussed, because the Japanese opinion of work and life is one thing. They are basically synonymous. They're not separate from each other. Life is work. Work is life. What are you talking about? A universal basic income. Did you do any work for that income? Then no. So they're not going to be, I think, the first to jump on board with this, but I think potentially that they will definitely benefit most from it for the same reasons that the quality of life would be so improved by something like automating their vehicles. Because you just have people who need this kind of support, and there's nobody to work all these jobs to earn the money. And so you have to find different ways to stimulate your economy, or just entirely switch the whole paradigm, entirely switch the whole way that you think about an economy, when if everything is automated, what is our obsession, what is our addiction to work in the traditional way? I mean, something that I always like to talk about historically is this idea of free time. So free time, when we throw out that word and we use it loosely, and it's for anything now, I want some more free time, I don't have enough free time, that has entered our lexicon through history. It wasn't always there, and there was a period of time where there was great social pushback to this idea of free time. There was a period where to get by, to create the goods that you needed, everybody needed to work 24/7. And then, to a lesser degree, obviously, then automation will evolve to have an impact on society, but not automation so much as mild automation. What is it? The assembly line. The sort of impact that that had meant that things could be done, finally, efficiently enough that people were riding around on bikes and having a little extra time for tea. They were not, aside from the absolute wealthiest, it was entering into a greater amount of the population. And when people saw this, because they were so used to the norm of working 24/7, they were like, oh, who's this lollygagger? Who is this person who isn't working all the time? That's so unusual. It can't be healthy. It's got to be strange. And when you think about now, obviously there was pushback, but because of the forces of technology and the kind of influence that it had on the economy, we have welcomed it in. We have welcomed in the idea. And if anything, we don't have enough free time. We're looking for this life-work balance. We want more. And automation could be the key to that, as well as a universal income. But because it's so totally different from the way that we do things now, if only for its otherness, for its strangeness, for how new it is, you can expect that there would be a lot of pushback. And of all places, especially in Japan, because there is such an association of your own personal worth with the work that you do. But things will inevitably change. At what rate exactly, I don't know. But it's really, really interesting to see how they will. And those are my thoughts. So Elon Musk, I hope, will, in fact I'm sure of it, will have a positive impact on the quality of life for the Japanese people, returning agency to an elderly population that would not otherwise have it. Not only that, it can have a huge positive impact in their workforce, which is dying to have a few things automated because they don't have the things to replace it. And then moving into just the general discussion of universal basic income, maybe a little further down the road, could be something else. It's not a silver bullet, and I would ask people who've studied more of universal basic income, who know a lot about automation, to please turn that into a discussion down in the comments below, because I'd love to learn more. This is a topic that I'm always picking up on. I'm always getting a new article to read about, and each and every one is more fascinating than the last that I read, and I'm sure that the people out there who watch this have also seen it as well. So what are your thoughts? What are you learning about it? What do you think about it? What's another country that you could think could be greatly impacted by the sort of efforts that Elon Musk is making and others like him? We've now arrived at the end of the video, and only in this video will I say going forward. From now on I won't even mention it at all, but I'm never going to ask anybody who watches these videos to like the video. I trust now, and I think it insults the intelligence of anybody watching, that of course if they like something they'll like it. And in that same hand, if they want to see more of it, they'll probably subscribe. So you don't need me going on like an automatron every single video telling you to do that. So I leave that in your hands now. You'll do what you want to do. I will say, however, that I appreciate you watching the video, and I am very, very grateful for that. So thank you very much. There'll be many more to come, and that's all for this one. I'll keep making them. I hope you keep watching them. Peace.